The observation deck of the Galactic Council station buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from 12 different species gathered to witness what many believed would be humanity's final humiliation. Ambassador Zethkri of the Valerian Empire stood at the center of the crowd, his forearms crossed in satisfaction while his golden eyes gleamed with anticipation. The human representative should arrive soon, Zethkri announced to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. Once we demonstrate the futility of their resistance, this entire sector will finally understand why the Valerian Empire has remained unchallenged for over 3 millennia. The other delegates murmured their agreement, though some exchanged uncertain glances. The humans had proven surprisingly resilient during the recent border conflicts, but surely even they would recognize the impossibility of facing a Kethmoran hunter in single combat. Through the massive transparasteel windows, the delegates could see the arena floating in space, a perfectly spherical chamber 1 kilometer in diameter, constructed from materials that could withstand planetary bombardment. At its center, a creature that had haunted the nightmares of civilizations across the galaxy waited with predatory patience. The Kethmoran stood 3 meters tall, its obsidian carapace gleaming under the arena's harsh lighting. 6 limbs ending in razor-sharp claws clicked against the metal floor as it moved, while clusters of crimson eyes tracked every shadow with supernatural awareness. Rows of needle-like teeth protruded from a mouth that had never known mercy, and bioluminescent patterns along its spine pulsed with an otherworldly intelligence that spoke of hunts spanning centuries. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Zethkri said, gesturing toward the creature with obvious pride. Kethmoran hunters are bred for one purpose: to eliminate threats to the Empire with absolute efficiency. This particular specimen has successfully completed over 200 hunts across 47 worlds. No prey has ever escaped its attention, and no warrior has ever survived direct combat with it. The Centaurian delegate, her blue-scaled skin pale with fear, stepped closer to the window. "Are you certain this is necessary, Ambassador? The humans have shown willingness to negotiate. Perhaps we could reach a diplomatic solution that doesn't require such extreme measures." Zethkri's laugh was like grinding stone. "Diplomacy is for equals, and humans are nothing more than an upstart species that has grown too bold for their own good. They've disrupted 3 of our mining operations and destroyed an entire patrol fleet. Such insolence cannot go unpunished." The truth was more complicated than Zethkri cared to admit. Human forces had indeed disrupted Valerian operations, but those operations had involved the systematic strip mining of inhabited worlds and the enslavement of their populations. The humans had intervened to protect species that the Galactic Council had written off as acceptable losses in the name of economic progress. "The challenge was issued according to ancient law," continued the ambassador, his voice taking on a ceremonial tone. "Single combat between champions, with the winner's species claiming dominance over the disputed territories. When the humans inevitably refuse or send some pathetic representative to be slaughtered, their cowardice will be exposed for all to see. No species will dare support them after such a display of weakness." A soft chime echoed through the observation deck, and the main doors hissed open. The assembled delegates turned as one, expecting to see a delegation of human diplomats arriving to formally withdraw their challenge or perhaps to beg for mercy. Instead, a single figure walked through the doorway with casual confidence that seemed completely at odds with the situation. She was human, obviously, standing perhaps 1.7 meters tall with shoulder-length brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. Her clothing was simple dark pants, a fitted jacket, and boots that had clearly seen extensive use. What struck the delegates most, however, was her complete lack of visible concern. She moved through the crowd of alien dignitaries as if she were attending a routine business meeting rather than witnessing the prelude to what should have been her species' humiliation. "I apologize for the delay," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent observation deck. Traffic was murder getting through the system checkpoints. Zethkri's golden eyes narrowed as he studied the newcomer. "You are the human representative? Where is your delegation? Your military escort? Your champion?" The woman extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting, which Zethkri ignored. "Captain Sarah Chen, formerly of the Terran Defense Corps, currently freelance. As for your questions, I don't need a delegation for a simple hunt. I left my military days behind when things got boring, and..." She smiled, and something in that expression made several delegates take involuntary steps backward. "I am the champion." The observation deck erupted in disbelieving chatter from a dozen different species, but Zethkri raised one of his hands for silence. "Impossible. You cannot be serious." Look at you, you're barely larger than a Centaurian child, you carry no visible weapons, and you show no signs of the genetic modifications or cybernetic enhancements that might make you marginally competitive against a Keth-Moran hunter.
Sarah's smile widened as she moved to stand directly in front of the massive window overlooking the arena.
Below them, the Keth-Moran had sensed the attention and was now standing at the center of the chamber, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing faster as it anticipated the beginning of the hunt.
Genetic modifications?
Sarah mused, as if considering the concept for the first time.
Cybernetic enhancements? Ambassador, I think you fundamentally misunderstand what makes humans dangerous. We don't become apex predators by changing ourselves to match our environment.
She turned to face him directly, and, for the first time since the challenge had been issued, Zethkri felt a flicker of uncertainty.
We become apex predators by making our environment change to match us.
The Zenthri delegate, whose species had encountered human military forces during a border dispute 5 years earlier, cleared his throat nervously.
Ambassador Zethkri, perhaps we should reconsider this course of action. Human combat doctrine is unconventional. They have demonstrated tactical flexibility that our military analysts still struggle to predict. Nonsense, Zethkri snapped, though his voice lacked some of its earlier certainty. The Keth-Moran is a perfect biological killing machine.
It has enhanced strength, supernatural reflexes, natural armor that can deflect most projectile weapons, and hunting instincts refined over millions of years of evolution.
What could one unaugmented human possibly do against such a creature? Sarah had been listening to this exchange with obvious amusement. Would you like me to show you?
I mean, we could stand here debating theoretical scenarios all day, or we could get this over with so everyone can go home. I have dinner plans, and I'd hate to keep someone waiting. The casual dismissal of the situation sent ripples of shock through the assembled delegates.
The Keth-Moran hunter was legendary throughout this sector of the galaxy. Entire military units had been deployed against single specimens with mixed results. The idea that any individual, let alone an apparently ordinary human, could treat such a creature as a minor inconvenience bordered on insanity.
Very well, Zethkri said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality.
The challenge will proceed as agreed.
Single combat in the arena, no outside assistance permitted, victory achieved only through the death of one participant. He gestured toward a transport shuttle waiting at the dock.
Your conveyance awaits, human. Try to die with some dignity.
Sarah nodded and started walking toward the shuttle, but paused at the doorway. Oh, before I forget, you might want to have your medical team standing by. Not for me, obviously, but someone's going to need to clean up the mess afterward. As the shuttle departed for the arena, carrying its lone human passenger toward what every delegate assumed would be certain death, Zethkri allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Soon the galaxy would witness the destruction of human arrogance, and the Valerian Empire could return to its expansion without further interference. On the shuttle, Saracen sat in comfortable silence, reviewing tactical data on a small handheld device. The Keth-Moran hunter was indeed impressive, faster than most military vehicles, strong enough to tear through armored bulkheads, and possessed of senses that could detect a heartbeat from half a kilometer away. Under normal circumstances, facing such a creature would require heavy weapons, environmental advantages, and preferably a full squad of well-trained soldiers. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Saracen was far from ordinary. The shuttle docked with the arena's entry port, and Sarah stepped into the airlock that would deposit her into the hunting ground. The chamber beyond was a masterpiece of engineering, variable terrain that could shift between urban environments, forest landscapes, or open plains at the touch of a button. Currently configured as a rocky wasteland dotted with metal structures, it provided numerous hiding places and tactical advantages for a sufficiently creative combatant. As the airlock cycled, Sarah reached into her jacket and withdrew what appeared to be a simple communication device. She spoke a single word in a language that predated human spaceflight by several thousand years, then tucked the device away and stepped into the arena. The Keth-Moran detected her presence immediately, its cluster of red eyes focusing on the small human figure with predatory intensity. It began moving forward with fluid grace, each step calculated to minimize sound while maximizing its ability to react to sudden movement. Bioluminescent patterns along its spine shifted to a hunting configuration, and razor-sharp claws extended from its 6 limbs. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center of the arena, hands at her sides, apparently oblivious to the death stalking toward her. To the observers in the station above, she looked like someone waiting for public transportation rather than facing the most dangerous predator in known space. The distance closed 50 meters, 30, 20. The Kethmoran gathered itself for the final strike, muscles tensing beneath its armored hide as it prepared to demonstrate why no prey had ever escaped its attention.
And Sarah smiled.
The expression was subtle, barely visible to the observers above, but the Kethmoran saw it clearly. For the first time in its long existence as an apex predator, the creature experienced something that its species had evolved beyond millions of years ago: uncertainty.
This prey was behaving all wrong.
Where was the fear?
The desperate attempt to flee? The frantic searching for weapons or hiding places?
Instead, the small human continued to stand motionless, that strange expression playing across her features as if she were enjoying some private joke. The Kethmoran's hunting instincts, honed by countless successful kills, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with this scenario. But it was too late to retreat. The creature's momentum carried it forward into its attack pattern, claws extending toward what should have been an easy kill. Sarah's hands moved with liquid precision, producing a small metallic object that she pressed against her throat. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the arena despite its conversational volume.
Keket, Netjer en Kamwasit. Neberger, Keeper Ra Sekmet.
The words were ancient Egyptian, a language that had been old when humanity first looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond their small blue world.
The translation was simple enough: darkness, gods of protection.
Lord of all, manifested Sekhmet.
In the observation station above, Zethkri leaned forward with confusion. What is the human doing?
Some form of prayer ritual before death?
How pathetic.
But the Zenthari delegate who had tried to warn him earlier was backing away from the window, his face pale with recognition.
That's not a prayer, he whispered. That's a summoning.
The temperature in the arena began to drop, and shadows that had no source started gathering around Sarah's motionless form. The Kethmoran, now only meters away from its target, suddenly found its forward momentum slowing as if the air itself had become thick and resistant.
And then, between one heartbeat and the next, Saracen was no longer alone in the arena.
The figure that materialized beside her stood nearly as tall as the Kethmoran, but where the alien hunter was all sharp edges and predatory grace, this newcomer radiated contained power that spoke of hunts conducted across millennia rather than mere centuries. Her form was distinctly feminine but clearly not entirely human: skin like polished bronze, eyes that held the depth of ancient wisdom, and movements that suggested she had been born to the art of killing. She wore simple clothing, fitted dark fabric that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never needed weapons because she was a weapon. When she smiled, revealing teeth that were perhaps a little too sharp to be entirely human, the Kethmoran's forward charge faltered completely. "Hello, old friend," the newcomer said to Sarah, her voice carrying accents from a dozen different languages.
"I was wondering when you'd call."
Sarah's own smile widened as she watched the Kethmoran struggle against the sudden atmospheric pressure that seemed to be pressing down on it from all directions.
"I thought you might enjoy the exercise, Keket. It's been too long since we hunted together."
In the observation station, chaos had erupted as delegates from multiple species began speaking rapidly into communication devices, demanding explanations that their xenobiology experts couldn't provide. Zethkri stared down at the arena with growing horror as his perfect biological weapon found itself faced with something that shouldn't have been possible. The Kethmoran, to its credit, attempted to adapt to this unexpected development. It shifted its attack pattern, circling the two figures while searching for signs of weakness or technological advantages. Its enhanced senses detected no energy signatures that would indicate advanced weaponry, no electromagnetic fields suggesting force shields or other defensive systems. But they also detected something else: a scent that triggered instinctive responses buried so deep in the creature's genetic memory that they predated its species' evolution into apex predators. It was the smell of something older, more dangerous, and infinitely more patient than anything the Kethmoran had ever encountered. Keket stretched languidly, like a cat preparing for play, and took a single step toward the circling hunter. The ground beneath her feet cracked from the simple pressure of her movement, and the Kethmoran's bioluminescent patterns shifted from hunting mode to something that might have been alarm. "Poor little thing," she said conversationally to Sarah. "It doesn't understand what it's facing. Should I explain, or would you prefer to let it figure things out the hard way?" Sarah checked her timepiece with casual indifference. "I really do have dinner plans, so let's not drag this out unnecessarily. Besides, I think our audience is getting impatient." Above them, Ambassador Zethkri was indeed growing impatient, though not in the way Sarah had suggested. His golden eyes were wide with confusion and growing fear as he watched his supposedly invincible hunter hesitate before two apparently unarmed opponents. "What are they?" he demanded of his military advisors. The female human summoned something, but our sensors show no transportation signatures, no energy expenditure, nothing that would explain how a second combatant appeared in the arena. His chief tactical officer, a scarred veteran of 3 interstellar wars, was studying the readouts with growing alarm. "Sir, the atmospheric readings in the arena are unusual. Gravity fluctuations, electromagnetic anomalies, and temperature variations that don't match any known technology. It's as if the laws of physics are operating differently in that space." "Impossible," Zethkri snapped. "The arena is equipped with the most advanced environmental controls in the galaxy. Nothing can alter its basic physical properties without massive energy expenditure." But, even as he spoke, the evidence was mounting that something unprecedented was occurring below them. The Kethmoran, frustrated by its inability to close with its opponents, finally committed to a full assault. It launched itself through the air with all the deadly grace that had made its species legendary, claws extended and teeth bared in a killing strike. Keket moved to intercept it with fluid motion that seemed to bend space around her. Her hand caught the creature's leading limb in mid-strike, and the sound of the impact echoed through the arena like thunder. The Kethmoran's forward momentum stopped completely, its massive form suspended in the air by nothing more than the grip of one bronze-skinned hand. For a moment, hunter and prey regarded each other in perfect stillness. Then, Keket spoke a single word in a language that predated recorded history, and the Kethmoran simply ceased. Not died, not collapsed, not fell to the ground in defeat. It ceased to exist in the arena, as if it had never been there at all. One moment a 3-meter killing machine hung suspended in the air, and the next there was only empty space and the fading echo of something that might have been a scream. The observation deck fell into stunned silence. 12 different species, each representing civilizations that had mastered interstellar travel and energy manipulation on a planetary scale, stared down at the arena where two figures stood in casual conversation as if they had just completed the most routine task imaginable. Zethkri's voice, when he finally found it, came out as barely more than a whisper. "What did they do to the hunter?" The Zenthari delegate, who had been quietly updating his government on the situation, closed his communication device and turned to face the Valerian ambassador. "They didn't do anything to it. They simply reminded it what humans really are when they stop pretending to be civilized." Below in the arena, Sarah was thanking Keket for her assistance while the ancient entity prepared to depart. "Same time next week for sparring practice?" Keket asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Sarah replied. "Though next time, maybe we could find something more challenging?" This one barely lasted 5 minutes. Keket laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with distant thunder. "You always were impossible to please." "Very well, next time I'll bring Anher. He's been complaining about being bored lately." And, with that, she was gone, vanishing between one moment and the next without any of the energy signatures that should have accompanied matter transportation. Sarah stood alone in the arena once more, apparently unfazed by the fact that she had just made one of the galaxy's most feared predators disappear through methods that defied every known law of physics. She walked to the center of the chamber and looked up at the observation station. "Well," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the communication system. "Are we done here, or do you have another hunter you'd like me to meet?" "I'm flexible on timing, but I really do need to wrap this up soon." The silence stretched for long moments before Zethkri managed to activate the communication array. His voice, when it came, lacked all of its earlier arrogance. "The challenge is complete. The terms of single combat have been satisfied." "Excellent," Sarah replied. "In that case, I believe the disputed territories are now under human protection, your mining operations in inhabited systems are permanently suspended, and any future expansion into this sector requires explicit approval from the Terran Defense Corps." Those were the terms of victory, correct? Zethkri wanted to object, to point out that what they had witnessed couldn't possibly be legitimate, that no species should have access to abilities that transcended known science. But the words died in his throat as he looked down at the human woman standing calmly in an arena where his empire's greatest weapon had existed just moments before. "Correct," he said finally, the word tasting like defeat. Sarah smiled and began walking toward the exit airlock. "Wonderful. The transport shuttle should be here in a few minutes to take me back to the station. While we're waiting, perhaps someone could explain to me why the Valerian Empire thought it was acceptable to enslave entire populations for mining operations?" I'm genuinely curious about the reasoning behind that particular policy decision. As she disappeared into the airlock, leaving behind an observation deck full of shaken delegates and one thoroughly humbled Valerian ambassador, the true implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in. Humanity, it seemed, had been holding back. And that was a thought that would keep civilizations awake at night for years to come. 3 hours after the impossible had occurred in the arena, Sarah Chin sat in the station's diplomatic quarters, calmly sipping tea while chaos erupted across the galaxy. Through the reinforced windows, she could see emergency broadcasts flickering across communication arrays as news of the Valerian Empire's defeat spread from system to system. The door chimed, and Admiral Marcus Webb of the Terran Defense Corps entered without waiting for permission. His weathered face showed a mixture of relief and exasperation that Sarah had seen many times during their shared military service.
You couldn't have just used conventional weapons? Webb asked, settling into the chair across from her. Maybe some enhanced armor, a few tactical advantages? Did you really need to make every species in the galaxy question everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality? Sarah set down her teacup with deliberate precision. Marcus, they sent a Kethmoran hunter. Do you know what those things are capable of?
I've seen one tear through an entire squad of enhanced Marines like they were made of paper.
Conventional weapons would have been suicide. So instead you decided to reveal that humans have access to entities that can apparently rewrite the laws of physics on demand?
Webb pulled out a datapad and activated a holographic display showing intelligence reports from across known space.
Every major power in the galaxy is now reassessing their entire understanding of human capabilities.
The Centaurian Federation has placed their border fleets on high alert.
The hegemony is demanding emergency sessions of the Galactic Council. And the Valorians.
He gestured helplessly. The Valorians are convinced we've been hiding some kind of ancient technology or alien alliance. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful.
Good. Maybe now they'll think twice before enslaving entire worlds for their mining operations. The Kethmoran wasn't just a weapon, Marcus, it was a statement.
They wanted to demonstrate that resistance to their expansion was futile.
And your response was to demonstrate that humanity has access to forces beyond their comprehension? Webb shook his head. Sarah, I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you pull off tactical miracles that military academies will study for centuries. But what happened in that arena?
He paused, searching for words.
That wasn't military tactics. That was something else entirely.
The door chimed again, and this time Sarah looked up with genuine interest.
Come in, Dr. Yates. I was wondering when you'd arrive.
Dr. Elena Yates entered the room with the purposeful stride of someone who had spent most of her life pursuing answers to impossible questions. As the head of the Terran Defense Corps' Xenoarchaeology Division, she had made a career of studying the remnants of ancient civilizations that predated human spaceflight by millions of years.
Captain Chen, she said formally, then glanced at Admiral Webb. Admiral. I assume you're here for the same reason I am?
Webb gestured at the holographic display still showing intelligence reports.
If by reason you mean trying to understand how one of my former officers made a 3-meter killing machine vanish into thin air using methods that our best scientists can't even begin to explain, then, yes.
Dr. Yates activated her own datapad and projected a series of archaeological images into the air above the table. Ancient stone tablets covered with hieroglyphic writing, star charts that showed constellations as they had appeared thousands of years before human civilization, and artistic depictions of figures that looked distinctly human standing alongside beings that clearly were not. These artifacts were discovered in a sealed chamber beneath the pyramid of Khufu 12 years ago, she began, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a lecture to particularly slow students. The chamber's existence was unknown to archaeologists because it was hidden behind displacement fields that our most advanced scanners couldn't penetrate. We only found it by accident during a routine geological survey. Sarah examined the projected images with obvious familiarity. The usual reaction was disbelief, followed by attempts to explain everything as elaborate hoaxes or misinterpretation of natural phenomena.
Exactly, Dr. Yates confirmed.
Except that carbon dating placed the artifacts at over 4,000 years old, and the displacement fields required energy manipulation techniques that we're only just beginning to understand.
The implications were significant. Admiral Webb studied the hieroglyphic tablets with growing unease. These writings, they're instructions, aren't they? Some kind of manual or reference guide. Among other things, Sarah said quietly.
Though instructions doesn't quite capture the scope of what ancient human civilizations were capable of when they chose to remember their true heritage. Dr. Yates manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific sections of text.
The translations took us 3 years to complete, primarily because the language incorporates concepts that don't exist in modern human understanding.
But the basic message is clear: humanity's ancestors had contact with entities that exist outside normal spacetime, and, under certain circumstances, those entities could be consulted. Consulted, Webb repeated flatly.
Is that what we're calling it?
Because what I saw in that arena looked more like a predator eliminating a rival than a consultation.
Sarah's smile held no warmth.
Keket is many things, Marcus, but she's never been subtle about her nature. Her domain encompasses protection, justice, and the destruction of those who threaten the innocent. The Kethmoran hunter had killed thousands of sentient beings across dozens of worlds. From her perspective, eliminating it was simply maintaining natural balance.
The implications of this statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket.
Webb was the first to break the silence.
How many of these entities can you contact? And, more importantly, how long has the Defense Corps been aware of this capability?
The Defense Corps became aware of my specific abilities 5 years ago, during the Rigel incident, Sarah replied.
As for how many entities I can contact?
She shrugged.
I've never tested the upper limits. Most situations don't require that level of intervention.
Dr. Yates brought up another series of images, surveillance footage from various military engagements where human forces had achieved victories that defied tactical analysis.
We've been reviewing historical data since the arena incident.
There are dozens of cases where human military units accomplished objectives that should have been impossible given their available resources. Engagements where enemy forces simply withdrew without explanation, weapons systems that malfunctioned at critical moments, environmental factors that consistently favored human positions. You think other people have these abilities, Webb said, the pieces finally clicking into place.
Not many, Sarah admitted.
The knowledge was deliberately obscured over time, partly for safety reasons and partly because most humans aren't psychologically equipped to handle direct contact with entities that exist outside conventional reality. But, yes, there are others. The holographic display shifted again, showing a star map with dozens of systems marked in different colors. These are territories where human forces have been active over the past decade, Dr. Yates explained. The green markers indicate successful interventions in slavery operations, illegal mining activities, or other violations of sapient rights.
The pattern becomes quite clear when you overlay it with reports of unexplained phenomena from the affected regions.
Webb studied the map with growing comprehension and concern. We've been fighting a shadow war. Using capabilities that most of our own government doesn't know about, against enemies who have no idea what they're really facing.
It's not a war, Sarah corrected. It's pest control. The galaxy is full of species that have become comfortable with the idea that strength gives them the right to dominate others. Occasionally, they need to be reminded that there are older definitions of strength that they've forgotten.
A soft chime indicated an incoming communication, and Admiral Webb activated his personal comm unit. The voice that emerged belonged to General Harrison, the current head of Terran Defense Command.
Admiral Webb, I need you and Captain Chen at Command Headquarters immediately.
We have a situation developing that requires immediate consultation.
Webb exchanged glances with Sarah. What kind of situation, General?
The kind where 3 different alien species have formally requested military assistance from the Terran Defense Corps in the last 2 hours. Harrison's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and dark humor. Apparently, word of our enhanced capabilities has spread faster than our intelligence estimates predicted. Sarah stood and straightened her jacket.
Which 3 species?
The Alta-Iran Republic, the Vegan Confederacy, and the Tau Ceti Coalition. All claiming that their territories are under threat from powers they can't handle using conventional military force. Dr. Yates looked up from her datapad with obvious interest.
What kind of threats?
Ancient automated defense systems on colony worlds, creatures emerging from deep space that don't respond to any known forms of communication, and, in one case, what appears to be a space station that's been drifting through their territory for the past 6 months without any detectable power source or life signs, but somehow manages to alter course whenever their ships approach.
Sarah nodded as if such reports were completely routine. The galaxy is waking up.
When major powers like the Valerian Empire suffer public defeats, it tends to encourage things that have been hiding to become more active.
Some of those things are beneficial. Others.
She shrugged. Others require management. Webb began gathering his equipment with the resigned efficiency of someone who had learned to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances.
How many humans actually know about these abilities? And why wasn't this information included in my security briefings when I took command of the Defense Corps?
Because your psychological profile indicated a 67% probability that you would attempt to weaponize the capabilities for large-scale military operations, Sarah replied matter-of-factly.
Which would have been both ethically problematic and tactically disastrous. The entities we work with aren't interested in helping humans conquer the galaxy.
They're interested in maintaining balance.
And you get to decide what constitutes balance? Sarah's expression grew serious. I don't decide anything.
I consult with beings whose perspective spans millennia and whose understanding of cause and effect operates on scales that most humans can't comprehend.
When they advise intervention, I follow that advice. When they recommend patience, I wait.
Dr. Yates had been reviewing additional data while they spoke.
Captain Chen, I'm seeing reports from the Valerian territories that suggest their mining operations weren't just extracting mineral resources.
There are references to archaeological excavations, artifacts being transported to research facilities, and experiments involving what they call temporal manipulation technology. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face the xenoarchaeologist.
Show me.
The holographic display shifted to surveillance images captured by long-range reconnaissance drones. Massive excavation sites on barren worlds, where Valerian machinery had carved through kilometers of rock to reach buried structures that clearly predated any known civilization. Transportation ships moving objects that seemed to bend light around themselves, creating visual distortions that made direct observation impossible. These sites match the archaeological signatures we discovered on Earth, Dr. Yates said quietly.
The Valorians aren't just strip mining worlds for raw materials.
They're searching for ancient technology that they don't understand and attempting to reverse engineer capabilities that were never meant for species at their level of development. Webb stared at the images with growing horror.
They're trying to access the same abilities that Sarah used against their hunter.
Worse, Sarah said, her voice carrying a cold edge that neither of her companions had heard before. They're attempting to do it through brute force technological analysis instead of proper consultation with the entities involved.
That kind of approach tends to attract attention from beings that are significantly less patient than Keket.
The communication unit chimed again, this time with an emergency priority signal that caused all three occupants of the room to freeze. General Harrison's voice, when it emerged, carried the controlled panic of someone delivering news that would reshape military planning for decades to come.
All senior staff to command immediately.
We have confirmed reports of spatial anomalies appearing in 17 different star systems. Ships entering the affected areas are changing. We're receiving transmissions from vessels that left dock 3 days ago claiming they've been traveling for months. Navigation equipment is reading stellar positions that place some ships thousands of light-years from their reported coordinates.
Dr.
Yates was already pulling up astronomical data, her fingers flying across her datapad's interface.
These systems, they're all locations where the Valorians had active archaeological operations. The temporal distortions are emanating from the excavation sites.
Sarah closed her eyes and touched the communication device at her throat, speaking a single word in the ancient language she had used in the arena. When she opened them again, her expression had changed completely.
We need to leave. Now. What's happening? Webb demanded.
The Valorians found something they shouldn't have, and they've been experimenting with it for months without understanding the consequences, Sarah replied, already moving toward the door.
The temporal anomalies aren't a side effect of their research. They're a response.
Something very old and very powerful has noticed their activities, and it's not pleased. As they rushed through the station's corridors toward the docking bay where a high-speed transport waited to carry them to Defense Command, Webb tried to process the implications of what he was learning.
How bad can this get? Sarah's response was delivered over her shoulder as she broke into a run.
Badly enough that I'm going to need to make some calls that I really didn't want to make. The kind of calls that tend to attract attention from entities that make Keket look like a household pet.
Behind them, the station's communication arrays were lighting up with emergency broadcasts from across the galaxy.
ships disappearing into temporal vortexes, planets experiencing gravitational anomalies that defied explanation, and, in the depths of space, things that had been sleeping for millions of years were beginning to stir. The Valerian Empire's quest for ultimate power had awakened forces that viewed the entire galaxy as their domain. And humanity, whether they liked it or not, was about to become the first line of defense against threats that existed outside the normal boundaries of space and time. As their transport accelerated toward the jump point that would carry them back to Earth, Saracen began composing messages in languages that predated human civilization. Some were requests for assistance. Others were warnings to entities that had been content to observe from the shadows. But all of them carried the same basic message: the galaxy was about to discover that there were consequences for disturbing things that were meant to remain undisturbed. And those consequences were going to require the kind of intervention that most species would dismiss as impossible until they witnessed it firsthand. Dr. Yates broke the silence that had settled over the transport's passenger compartment. "Captain, what exactly did the Valorians find in those excavations?" Sarah's smile held no humor at all. "A door. And, like most species that stumble across ancient technology they don't understand, they decided to see what would happen if they opened it. What's on the other side? Things that the entities I work with locked away for very good reasons. Things that view the current state of galactic civilization as an infestation that needs to be corrected." Admiral Webb leaned forward in his seat. "And our job is to keep that door closed?" Sarah shook her head. "Our job is to deal with whatever comes through it. Because based on the temporal anomalies we're seeing, they didn't just open the door. They broke it." Outside the transport's windows, the stars seemed to flicker as space itself rippled around them. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was about to discover that their role as protectors and problem solvers was only just beginning. The real test wouldn't be facing individual predators in controlled environments. It would be confronting forces that could reshape reality itself, using abilities that most humans didn't even know they possessed. And, somewhere in the ancient ruins scattered across a dozen worlds, things that had waited patiently for millions of years were finally free to resume activities that had once required the combined efforts of multiple galactic civilizations to contain. The game had changed completely. Now the question was whether humanity could adapt fast enough to play at the new level. The emergency session at Terran Defense Command headquarters took place in a secure chamber 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by enough shielding to withstand direct nuclear bombardment. Around the circular table sat 23 individuals who represented humanity's response to threats that most governments preferred to pretend didn't exist. Admiral Webb recognized less than half of them. Dr. Yates was there, along with several other xenoarchaeologists and theoretical physicists. General Harrison occupied his usual seat, flanked by senior military advisors. But the rest were strangers, men and women of various ages whose only common characteristic was an indefinable quality that reminded Webb of Sarah Chen. "The situation has deteriorated significantly in the past 6 hours, General Harrison began, activating a holographic display that showed real-time data from across known space. 17 star systems are now experiencing temporal anomalies of increasing severity. 3 colony worlds have reported that their local star appears to be aging at an accelerated rate. And we've lost contact with 2 exploration vessels that were investigating the phenomena." Dr. Elena Vesquez, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed older than her face, leaned forward to study the data. "These aren't random occurrences. The pattern suggests a coordinated response to the Valerian excavations, as if something is systematically unraveling their research sites." "Not unraveling," Sarah corrected from her position at the far end of the table. "Reclaiming. The Valorians found artifacts that were never meant to be disturbed, and now the entities that created those artifacts are cleaning up the mess." A young man who couldn't have been older than 25 spoke up, his voice carrying an authority that seemed at odds with his appearance. "I've been in contact with the keepers of the Western Gate. They confirm that multiple containment protocols have been breached. The Valorians didn't just find a door, they found an entire complex of sealed chambers, and they've been breaking into them systematically for the past 8 months. Admiral Webb felt increasingly out of his depth as the conversation continued. "Excuse me, but could someone explain what we're actually dealing with? In terms that don't require a degree in theoretical xenoarchaeology?" Sarah exchanged glances with several of the other attendees before responding. 65 million years ago, there was a galactic civilization that achieved mastery over space, time, and dimensions that exist parallel to our own reality. They were incredibly advanced, but they made the mistake of awakening entities from layers of existence that operate according to different physical laws.
The war that followed lasted for approximately 12 million years, Dr. Vasquez added.
It ended when the surviving members of that civilization sacrificed themselves to create containment systems that would keep the hostile entities trapped in pocket dimensions. Those containment systems were buried on thousands of worlds across the galaxy, hidden behind temporal locks that would prevent less advanced species from accidentally releasing what was trapped inside.
Webb felt a cold certainty settling in his stomach. And the Valorians broke those locks.
17 of them so far, confirmed the young man.
Each breach weakens the overall containment network. If they manage to break enough locks, the entire system could collapse.
General Harrison pulled up detailed schematics of the affected regions.
Our long-range reconnaissance teams have identified 43 additional Valorian archaeological sites.
If their pattern holds, they'll attempt to breach at least 12 more containment systems in the next 72 hours.
That can't happen, Sarah said flatly.
Based on the intelligence I've received from my contacts, 25 breaches would be enough to create a cascade failure.
Everything that was locked away would be released simultaneously.
Dr. Yates activated her own datapad, projecting historical records from various alien civilizations.
I'd been researching references to similar events in the archaeological record.
12 different species have myths about a time of unmaking when stars went dark and entire worlds simply ceased to exist. The dates vary, but they all point to the same approximate period, 65 million years ago.
The same period when the first containment system was established, Webb observed. What exactly are we trying to keep contained?
Sarah touched the communication device at her throat and spoke several words in the ancient Egyptian that Webb was beginning to recognize. A moment later, the air above the conference table shimmered, and 3 figures materialized out of apparently empty space.
The first was Keket, the bronze-skinned entity that Webb had seen in surveillance footage from the arena.
The second appeared to be male, with features that suggested ancient Greek or Roman ancestry, wearing simple clothing that somehow radiated authority and controlled power. The third was clearly female, pale-skinned with dark hair and eyes that held the depth of Arctic ice.
Gentlemen and ladies, Sarah said formally, allow me to introduce 3 of humanity's oldest allies. Keket, whom you've already met.
Anher, guardian of the Eastern Threshold. And Skadi, keeper of the Frozen Paths. Admiral Webb found himself staring at beings that his rational mind insisted couldn't exist, while his instincts screamed that he was in the presence of apex predators whose attention he very much didn't want to attract. Anher spoke first, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The containment breaches have attracted attention from entities that have been dormant since the last galactic reset. 3 separate incursion attempts have been detected and neutralized, but larger forces are gathering.
Scotty's contribution came in a voice like winter wine through mountain peaks. The temporal distortions are accelerating.
Time flows differently in the breached zones, minutes pass like hours in some areas, while decades compress into seconds in others.
Ships entering these regions are experiencing temporal shear that ages their crews to death while their hulls remain intact.
Keket stepped forward, her attention focused on the holographic display showing the affected star systems.
The most immediate concern is the Valorian fleet currently approaching the primary containment site.
If they succeed in breaching that particular facility, the resulting cascade will release entities that make our previous interventions look like minor pest control.
General Harrison studied the strategic overview with growing alarm.
Our intelligence indicates that the Valorian force includes 12 heavy cruisers, 6 assault carriers, and their new experimental dreadnought.
They're treating this as a full-scale military operation. Because they still don't understand what they're dealing with, Sarah said. To them, this is about securing ancient technology that will give their empire dominance over the galaxy.
They can't conceive of the possibility that some things are too dangerous to use. Dr. Vasquez pulled up detailed scans of the primary containment site.
The facility is located in the Kepler 442 system, on the 4th planet from the star.
The Valorians have been conducting preliminary excavations there for 6 weeks, but, according to our reconnaissance data, they haven't yet reached the main containment chamber.
How long do we have? Webb asked.
Anher consulted what appeared to be a crystalline device that showed star positions in 3-dimensional space. Based on their current progress rate, approximately 18 hours before they breach the primary seal. Once that happens, the entities contained within will have approximately 6 minutes to escape before our intervention protocols can be activated.
6 minutes to destroy everything within a 50 light-year radius, Scotty added helpfully. The silence that followed this statement was broken by the young man Webb hadn't yet been introduced to. We need to stop them before they reach the main chamber. Full intervention, maximum force, no warnings. Sarah nodded slowly. Agreed. But, this isn't something we can handle with conventional military assets. The Valorians have surrounded the excavation site with enough firepower to sterilize a planet. We'll need to approach this differently. General Harrison activated his command interface, bringing up deployment options for the Defense Corps' rapid response fleets. Our nearest battle group is 36 hours away at maximum acceleration. Even if we stripped every available ship from patrol duties, we couldn't match the Valorian force strength in time. You're thinking like a conventional military commander, Sarah observed. This situation requires a different approach entirely. She turned to address the three entities directly. Keket, what's the maximum number of human operatives you and your colleagues can transport directly to the target system? Transport is not the limiting factor, Keket replied. The challenge will be operating in an environment where the containment breaches have destabilized local spacetime. Conventional matter may experience temporal fluctuations that could be problematic. And her nodded agreement. However, individuals with properly established connections to our realm should be able to maintain temporal stability through direct intervention. I estimate that 12 operatives would be sufficient for the tactical requirements. Admiral Webb found himself asking the question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. What exactly are you proposing? Sarah stood and moved to the strategic display, highlighting the Valorian fleet positions around Kepler 442. We insert a small team directly onto the excavation site, bypass their entire defensive perimeter, and prevent them from breaching the primary containment system. Permanently. 12 people against an entire fleet? 12 people with backup from entities that exist outside normal spacetime, Sarah corrected. The Valorian ships can't engage targets they can't detect using conventional sensors. And their weapons can't damage opponents who aren't entirely present in this dimensional layer. Dr. Yates looked up from her archaeological data with obvious concern. Sarah, the energy signatures we're detecting from the excavation site suggest they've already partially breached the outer containment layers. The area around the facility may be experiencing reality distortions that could affect even enhanced human operatives. Which is why we're not going in as entirely human, the young man said. Full partnership protocols, temporary dimensional bridging, maximum intervention authority. Scotty smiled, revealing teeth that were definitely not human. It has been some time since we were authorized for full manifestation in the physical realm. This should be educational. Webb realized that he was witnessing the planning stages of an operation that would redefine humanity's role in galactic affairs. What are the risks if this plan fails? Complete dimensional cascade within 72 hours, Anher replied matter-of-factly. The entities contained in the primary facility include beings that view the current structure of reality as an inconvenience to be corrected. Their release would result in the systematic dismantling of physical laws across multiple star systems. And the risks if the plan succeeds? Sarah's smile held no comfort whatsoever. Every major power in the galaxy will know for certain that humanity has access to capabilities that transcend conventional physics. Our days of operating in the shadows will be permanently over. General Harrison had been reviewing personnel files while the conversation continued. Assuming we proceed with this operation, who are the other operatives? I'm looking at the psychological profiles for individuals cleared for this level of intervention, and the list is short. 27 active operatives worldwide, Sarah confirmed. 12 will be sufficient for the primary mission. The others will handle secondary objectives, containment site surveys, temporal anomaly stabilization, and dealing with any entities that may have already escaped from the breached facilities. A new display activated, showing personnel files for individuals whose existence Admiral Webb had never suspected. Men and women from various backgrounds and nations, united only by their demonstrated ability to maintain psychological stability while working with entities that operated outside normal human understanding. Dr. Elena Vasquez studied the mission parameters with professional interest. The temporal distortions around the excavation site will make conventional communication impossible. How will the team coordinate their activities? Keket touched a crystalline device at her throat, and her voice took on harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in the listener's bones. Direct consciousness bridging.
All operatives will share awareness during the operation, allowing for instantaneous coordination regardless of physical separation or temporal displacement. That sounds like it could be psychologically traumatic, Dr. Yates observed.
Less traumatic than watching the galaxy dissolve into component atoms, Anher pointed out reasonably.
The conference room's communication system chimed with an emergency priority alert. General Harrison activated the incoming transmission, and the voice that emerged belonged to Captain Rodriguez of the reconnaissance vessel Hermes.
Command, we have urgent updates from the Kepler 442 system.
The Valerian excavation has accelerated significantly in the past 2 hours. They're using some kind of temporal manipulation technology to speed up their drilling operations. At current rates, they'll reach the main containment chamber in 8 hours, not 18. Sarah immediately activated her communication device, speaking rapidly in the ancient language that seemed to be her primary means of contacting her otherworldly allies. The three entities in the room exchanged glances that conveyed volumes of information without words.
Change of plans, Sarah announced. We leave immediately.
Full emergency protocols, maximum intervention authority, and we hope we're not already too late. As the meeting dissolved into rapid preparation activities, Admiral Webb found himself standing alone with Dr. Yates while the others coordinated deployment details that involved concepts he couldn't begin to understand.
Elena, he said quietly, what are the odds that humanity survives the next 72 hours? Dr.
Yates finished packing her archaeological equipment and looked up with an expression that mixed professional curiosity with very personal fear.
Unknown, Admiral.
We're about to discover whether our species' relationship with entities from parallel dimensions is strong enough to prevent a cascade failure that could unravel the structure of local spacetime.
And, if it isn't?
Then, we'll have approximately 6 minutes to say goodbye to everything we've ever known. Around them, the conference room had transformed into a coordination center for an operation that would either save galactic civilization or serve as the opening act for its complete destruction. 12 humans were about to attempt something that most species would consider impossible, backed by allies whose true nature remained deliberately mysterious. The next few hours would determine whether humanity's ancient partnerships were sufficient to contain forces that had once required the sacrifice of an entire galactic civilization to defeat. Admiral Webb watched Sarah Chen and her colleagues prepare for deployment, knowing that he was witnessing either the beginning of humanity's emergence as a true galactic power, or the final act of a species that had reached too far beyond their understanding.
Either way, the galaxy would never be the same.
Outside the secure facility, reality itself was beginning to show stress fractures as the Valerian excavations continued their relentless progress toward chambers that had been sealed for 65 million years. Time was running out, and the margin for error had shrunk to nothing. The real test was about to begin. The transport materialized in the shadow of Kepler 442d's largest moon, invisible to conventional sensors due to dimensional cloaking provided by humanity's ancient allies. Through the viewports, the 12 operatives could see the Valerian excavation site, a massive scar carved into the planet's surface, surrounded by defensive installations that bristled with enough firepower to destroy small fleets. Sarah Chen reviewed the tactical situation one final time, her consciousness already partially bridged with the entities that would guide their intervention. Around her, 11 other humans prepared equipment that existed at the intersection of advanced technology and forces that most scientists would classify as magic. Status report, she requested, her voice carrying clearly through the shared awareness link that connected all team members. Lieutenant James Park, formerly of Terran Special Forces, checked his temporal stabilization gear.
All equipment operational. Dimensional anchors are holding steady despite the reality distortions in the area.
Dr. Maya Singh, specialist in containment protocol analysis, consulted readings from devices that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The Valorians have breached 6 of the 7 outer containment layers. They're approximately 90 minutes from reaching the primary chamber, assuming their current excavation rate. Commander Elena Torres adjusted her consciousness interface, preparing for the full partnership protocol that would allow her to channel abilities that no unaugmented human could safely access. Kekit confirms that entities in the primary chamber are becoming aware of the approaching breach. We're detecting probability fluctuations that suggest they're already beginning to influence local reality.
Sarah nodded and activated the transport's deployment system. Phase 1 insertion in 30 seconds.
Remember, this isn't a military engagement in any conventional sense.
We're not trying to destroy the Valerian force. We're trying to prevent them from completing an action that will cascade into galactic catastrophe.
The transport's rear bay opened, revealing not the vacuum of space but a shimmering portal that led directly to the surface of the planet below. One by one, the operatives stepped through the dimensional gateway, emerging from apparently empty air in various locations around the excavation site. Sarah materialized inside the primary dig shaft, 3 kilometers below the planet's surface, where massive Valerian drilling equipment carved through ancient rock formations toward chambers that had been sealed since before Earth's dinosaurs walked. The air hummed with energy discharges from machinery that operated at the limits of Valerian engineering capabilities. Above her, she could sense the positions of her teammates as they moved to secure critical points around the facility. The shared awareness link allowed for coordination that transcended normal communication, providing each operative with instant updates on tactical developments across the entire site. Valerian security forces detected the first breach of their perimeter within minutes, but their response was hampered by the fact that the intruders didn't appear on sensors until they chose to reveal themselves. Weapons designed to track and engage conventional targets proved useless against opponents who could step partially outside normal spacetime. Lieutenant Park appeared behind a squad of Valerian Marines, materialized long enough to disable their communication equipment using technology that temporarily aged the electronic components to non-functionality, then vanished again before they could respond. Across the facility, similar encounters left security forces increasingly confused and demoralized. But the real challenge wasn't the Valerian military presence. As Sarah descended deeper into the excavation shaft, the reality distortions around the containment site grew stronger. The walls showed stress fractures that revealed glimpses of other dimensions, where different physical laws governed the behavior of matter and energy. Contact, Commander Torres reported through the awareness link. I'm seeing movement in the deepest chambers. Whatever's down there is responding to the excavation activities. Dr. Singh's analysis was equally disturbing. The containment field is destabilizing faster than predicted. The entities inside are actively working to weaken the remaining barriers from their side. We have maybe 40 minutes before spontaneous breach, regardless of what the Valorians do. Sarah reached the bottom of the excavation shaft, where Valerian engineers had assembled a massive drilling platform directly above the entrance to the primary containment chamber. The machinery was impressive energy beams that could cut through solid rock like paper, force shields that deflected debris, and temporal accelerators that allowed the work to proceed at impossible speeds. Standing at the center of it all was Admiral Kazek, the Valerian officer in charge of the archaeological operation. His forearms gestured rapidly as he coordinated the final phase of excavation, while his golden eyes remained fixed on readings that showed them approaching their objective. Sarah stepped out of dimensional concealment and walked calmly across the platform toward him. Admiral Kazek. We need to talk. The Valerian military personnel spun toward her with weapons drawn, but froze as they realized their targeting systems couldn't lock onto her position. Energy readings fluctuated around her form in patterns that suggested she existed in multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Human, Admiral Kazek said, his voice mixing surprise with calculation. I assume you're here to interfere with our research, just as your species has interfered with our legitimate expansion activities across the sector. I'm here to prevent you from destroying everything within 50 light-years of this position, Sarah replied conversationally. Though I suppose that counts as interference from your perspective. Kazek studied her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a tactical puzzle. You're the one who eliminated our Keth Moran hunter. Our intelligence reports suggested that humans had access to advanced technology, but the methods you employed suggested capabilities that transcend known science. Not transcend, Sarah corrected. Predate. The science you're familiar with is based on understanding reality as it currently exists. We work with entities that remember when reality was structured differently. The drilling platform shuddered as the excavation equipment broke through another layer of ancient containment barriers. Warning lights flashed across multiple displays as energy readings spiked beyond normal operational parameters. Sir, one of the Valerian technicians called out, we're detecting massive energy fluctuations from the chamber below. The readings don't match anything in our database. Admiral Kazek ignored the warning and focused his attention on Sarah. Whatever ancient technology you've discovered, it doesn't change the fundamental balance of power in this galaxy. The Valerian Empire commands resources that dwarf anything your species can muster. Resources, Sarah mused. Like the fleet you have positioned around this planet? 12 heavy cruisers, 6 assault carriers, and 1 experimental dreadnought? You're well informed for someone who arrived here without detection.
Sarah smiled and activated her communication device. Kekit, would you mind providing a demonstration of why conventional military assets are irrelevant to this situation? High above the planet's surface, something occurred that would require military analysts across the galaxy to completely revise their understanding of strategic capabilities. The Valerian fleet, 20 vessels representing the most advanced naval technology their civilization had ever produced, simply stopped functioning. Not destroyed, not damaged, not disabled through conventional means. The ships remained intact and their crews unharmed, but every system from propulsion to life support had aged to the point of complete failure. Vessels that had left dock weeks earlier now contained equipment that showed centuries of wear, rendered completely inoperable through accelerated temporal decay. Admiral Kazek received status reports from his fleet commanders with growing disbelief. Impossible. No known technology can affect multiple targets across that distance simultaneously. Known technology, Sarah agreed. But we're not dealing with known technology. We're dealing with entities whose understanding of cause and effect operates on scales that make galactic empires look like temporary inconveniences. The drilling equipment broke through the final barrier layer, and the excavation shaft filled with light that hurt to look at directly. Energy readings climbed beyond the maximum capacity of monitoring equipment, while gravitational fluctuations caused the planet itself to shudder. "Sir!" The lead technician's voice carried panic that penetrated even Valerian military discipline. "The chamber is open, but the energy readings suggest massive instability. Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel." Through the awareness link, Sarah could sense her teammates responding to similar breaches at excavation sites across the galaxy. Reality was coming apart at the seams as containment systems that had held for 65 million years finally failed. But she could also sense something else, the awakening of entities that had waited patiently for this moment, entities whose response to the crisis had been planned for longer than most species had existed. "Admiral," Sarah said formally, "I'm offering you one chance to withdraw your forces and seal this facility. What you've uncovered down there will destroy your empire, your species, and everything else in the local galactic region if it's allowed to fully emerge." Kazek's response was interrupted by a sound that came from the open chamber, not quite mechanical, not quite organic, but suggesting intelligence that operated according to principles that predated the formation of the galaxy itself. "What is that?" one of the Valerian technicians whispered. Sarah's expression grew grim. "That's the sound of something that views the current arrangement of spacetime as an error that needs correction. And it's been waiting 65 million years for the opportunity to fix things." The light from the chamber began to pulse in patterns that hurt to perceive directly, while the gravitational fluctuations intensified to the point where equipment began floating away from the planet's surface. In the depths below, something vast and patient was beginning to move. "Full intervention protocol," Sarah announced through the awareness link. "All operatives to emergency positions. Partnership authorization maximum level." Around the excavation site, 11 other humans underwent transformations that redefined the boundaries between organic life and forces that existed outside conventional reality. Their forms blurred as ancient entities manifested through human consciousness, creating hybrid beings that combine mortal determination with immortal capabilities. Admiral Kazek watched in fascination and growing terror as the humans around his facility became something else entirely. "What are you?" "We're what happens when a species that refuses to accept limitations forms alliances with entities that existed before limitations were invented," Sarah replied. Her own transformation was beginning, bronze light gathering around her form as Kekit prepared for full manifestation. The entity emerging from the containment chamber below detected the presence of its ancient opponents and responded with something that might have been surprise. Its progress upward through the excavation shaft slowed as it reassessed the tactical situation. Through the awareness link, Sarah received updates from excavation sites across the galaxy. Similar interventions were occurring wherever containment breaches had been detected, as humanity's hidden guardians revealed themselves to confront threats that conventional military forces couldn't even properly perceive. "Last chance, Admiral," Sarah said, her voice now carrying harmonics that spoke of patience measured in geological ages. "Order your forces to withdraw and initiate containment protocols, or we'll do it for you." Kazek looked around at his expedition, hundreds of the Empire's finest military personnel and scientists, surrounded by equipment that represented decades of technological advancement, all rendered irrelevant by opponents who operated according to rules that his species had never learned. "Stand down," he ordered finally. "All units, implement evacuation procedures." But it was too late for simple withdrawal.
The entity in the chamber below had committed to emergence, and stopping it would require the kind of intervention that would reshape local spacetime regardless of who survived the experience. "Kekit," Sarah said formally, "primary authorization granted. Full manifestation approved." The transformation that followed redefined the nature of the excavation site. Sarah's human form became a conduit for entities whose existence spanned dimensions, while around the facility her teammates underwent similar changes. The laws of physics became suggestions rather than absolute rules as forces older than galactic civilization took direct action. The entity emerging from the containment chamber met resistance that it had not encountered since the last galactic reset. Ancient powers clashed in ways that caused nearby stars to flicker, while spacetime itself bent around the conflict. Admiral Kazak and his forces found themselves protected by energy barriers that allowed them to witness events that should have destroyed them instantly. They watched as beings that embodied fundamental forces of creation and destruction fought for control over whether local reality would continue to exist in its current form. The battle lasted approximately 4 minutes in normal time, though temporal distortions made accurate measurement impossible. When it ended, a hostile entity had been forced back into containment chambers that were now reinforced by barriers that existed across multiple dimensional layers. Sarah returned to human form gradually, her consciousness separating from Kekit's with the practiced ease of long partnership. Around her, the other operatives completed similar transitions, leaving behind 12 apparently ordinary humans standing among the ruins of the most advanced excavation equipment the Valerian Empire had ever constructed. "Status report," she requested through the awareness link. The responses came quickly. All 17 breached containment sites had been secured. The entities that had been partially released were back under proper containment. The temporal anomalies were stabilizing as reality reasserted its normal structure. Admiral Kazak approached her cautiously, his golden eyes wide with the shock of someone whose understanding of the universe had been completely overturned. "The Empire will want to know what happened here." Sarah nodded as she gathered her equipment. "Tell them the truth. Tell them that some doors are locked for very good reasons, and that humanity has been trusted with the responsibility of keeping those doors sealed." "Trusted by whom?" "By entities that were old when your species was still evolving from single-celled organisms," Sarah replied. "By forces that view the preservation of galactic civilization as important enough to justify occasional intervention." As the human operatives prepared to depart, Admiral Kazak made one final attempt to understand what he had witnessed. "Why reveal yourselves now? You could have remained hidden, continued operating in secret." Sarah paused and looked back at the sealed excavation site, where reality had returned to its normal configuration. "Because the galaxy is growing up. More species are developing technologies that can accidentally breach ancient containment systems. It's time for everyone to understand that some research is too dangerous to pursue, and that there are consequences for ignoring those boundaries." The transport that retrieved the human operatives was invisible to conventional sensors, appearing and disappearing without any of the energy signatures that should have accompanied matter transportation. As it departed the Kepler 442 system, leaving behind a Valerian expedition that would never again view the galaxy as a place governed by predictable rules. Aboard the transport, Sarah Chen filed her mission report with Terran Defense Command while reviewing intelligence updates from across known space. The revelation of humanity's true capabilities was spreading rapidly through diplomatic channels, causing emergency sessions of governing bodies on dozens of worlds. Some species were requesting immediate alliance negotiations. Others were demanding explanations for what they viewed as a fundamental violation of galactic sovereignty. A few were making preparations for conflicts they couldn't possibly understand. "What happens next?" Lieutenant Park asked as he reviewed the political implications of their mission. "The galaxy adapts," Sarah replied. "Some species will accept that there are forces beyond their current understanding and adjust their expansion plans accordingly. Others will continue pushing boundaries until they encounter consequences that teach them respect for ancient warnings." Dr. Singh looked up from her analysis of the containment breach data. "The entities we prevented from escaping, how many more sites like that exist?" "Thousands," Sarah admitted. "Scattered across the galaxy, hidden behind barriers that most species don't even recognize as artificial. Our job is to make sure they stay hidden until galactic civilization develops the wisdom to handle that level of responsibility." Commander Torres finished her equipment inventory and turned her attention to the larger strategic picture. "Will humanity's role as guardians remain secret?" Sarah's smile held a mixture of resignation and anticipation. "Secret?
No.
After today, every major power in the galaxy knows that humans have access to capabilities they can't explain or duplicate.
But, understanding our role as guardians. She shrugged. That will take time.
Outside the transport's viewports, the stars seemed brighter somehow, as if reality itself had been refreshed by the successful resolution of the crisis. The galaxy continued its ancient dance, unaware of how close it had come to experiencing changes that would have made life as most species knew it impossible. But, in hidden archives on a dozen worlds, entities that remembered the first galactic civilization made note of humanity's successful intervention. The trust placed in a young species was being justified, and the ancient partnerships were proving strong enough to handle challenges that would only grow more complex as galactic civilization continued to expand. Humanity had revealed themselves as guardians of forces beyond normal understanding. Now they would learn whether the galaxy was ready for that revelation, or whether the real challenges were only just beginning. The game had changed permanently. The question now was whether all the players would survive long enough to learn the new rules. As the transport jumped to hyperspace, carrying its crew back to Earth and the complex political negotiations that would follow, Sarah Chin began planning for challenges that she knew were coming. The Valerian Empire's excavations had been stopped, but they weren't the only species developing archaeological technologies that could accidentally breach ancient safeguards. The galaxy was growing up, and growing up meant learning that some knowledge came with responsibilities that lasted for millions of years. Humanity was ready for that responsibility. The question was whether everyone else was ready for humanity to have it. The real test was just beginning.